Hello, Aggies, and welcome back to our third episode of Behind the Horns. I am Sports Information Director Max Mans. Joining me today is Jake Nace. We are excited to introduce our next guests.
Absolutely. Today we have two-time national qualifier and the winningest wrestler in Del Valle women's wrestling history, Bridgette Schoultz, along with her head coach, Andrew Taylor. Bridgette and Andrew, welcome.
Great to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Bridgette, let's start with you. How did you originally get into wrestling, and tell us a little bit about your career before Delaware Valley?
Yeah, so pretty much my whole life I lived with my grandma, and when I turned 16, she passed away. So I moved in with my aunt, and my aunt and her kids were always into sports. They were always doing something. And when I moved in, they were really into wrestling. So they told me as a joke, they were like, well, if you're going to live here, you're going to have to join. And I was really upset at first. Like, I was not really into anything physical, any sports or anything. But I tried it, and I really liked it, so I kept going with it. At first, it was for fun, and I went to a Catholic school, so all I could do was club. So I wasn't really that into it. But I think somewhere around, like, my senior year, I started to realize the more work I put into it and the more purpose I had for it, the more results I was seeing, and I started really being into it and decided I wanted to continue doing it in college.
Yeah, so to touch up on that, what really motivated you to choose and continue your academic and wrestling career here at Delaware Valley coming out of high school? Because you said you had an interest in wrestling, came a lot from your family, they motivated you a lot, and you wrestled in high school. What chose you to choose Delaware Valley as your destination for being a collegiate wrestler?
I think the thing that really made me come to Del Valle was being recruited by the coach at the current time. I was newer to sports, so I didn't think that anyone would, reach out to me and want me to be part of their team. So it made me feel special in a way that someone really wanted me to come out there and be part of their team and what they were building.
And, what were some of those challenges transitioning from the high school level to compete at college?
Definitely when I came to college, I realized the experience level was way different. And just the cardio and conditioning that it takes to be a college athlete was on another level. But I think I was quick to, get up there with them and compete with them. So.
Now, Andrew, let's move over to you for a little bit. Let's hear a little of your story, how you progressed through your wrestling career, and then how you ended up here in Doylestown.
Yeah, so I started like most kids, started out in grade school, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, and then just kind of grew into loving it, did all different types of sports, and then ended up going to college for simply wrestling, and then had a pretty successful collegiate career at Baldwin-Wallace University with under head coach Jamie Gibbs. And then, from there, I worked on staff with him for 6 years when I graduated in 2014 up till 2020. And then the job opening for Del Valle came up, and I was pretty excited to put my name in the hat and work for it. And I'd known of Del Valle just from the history of coaching and how good they were. And about 2015, they took, a bunch of guys to the national tournament, Hershey, PA, and they were, a fifth place team in the country, and they had, a very, very tough team. So when the job opened up here, I thought to myself, this is kind of a sitting gold mine, and was pretty excited to uproot out of Cleveland and make the transition out here to PA.
Yeah, and now after 2 full years as head coach of Delaware Valley men's wrestling, which we could do a whole nother podcast on what you've done for the men's wrestling program. As a former wrestler myself, my freshman year, there was only 6 kids on the team to finish the season. Then you came in my sophomore year, and 4 years later, you have the men's wrestling team right outside the top 25 in the nation. But back to women's wrestling, you now stepped up as the director of wrestling operations, which means you are both in charge of the men's and women's programs. How did this new role provide for the wrestling program, and how did it change from a coaching standpoint? Because now you stand on both sidelines for men's wrestling and women's wrestling.
Yeah, I think, the sport of wrestling is continuing to evolve and grow immensely, and adding women's wrestling is so good for our sport and so good for our product that, knowing we had a women's wrestling program and kind of seeing where it was at while I was the men's coach, and then having an opportunity to, coach somebody as dedicated as Bridgette and committed to, committed to her craft as Bridgette was, an opportunity for me to give her a great experience and make sure that she could maximize her potential, as well as the other girls that started that year. Sierra Janes and Lily Kinder. So, my big thing was to give them a good first experience, make sure they understood what, college wrestling really meant, and then recruit a team that, we could build something pretty special with, because, it's very, very difficult to grow a women's wrestling program right now. But, if you do it the right way and you stay consistent enough with it, one, it's a lot of fun, and two, you give a lot of female athletes an opportunity to compete at the next level, which is the best thing for our sport.
What would you say is the biggest difference from being on the men's side moving over to the women's?
It's a little bit of a different rule set with the freestyle wrestling against the folk style wrestling. So obviously just, the ability to transition from both of those and going from, one day you're at folk style and the next day you're at freestyle. So just understanding the little nuances in between that. And then two, I just think, with women's wrestling really being under one division, the levels of wrestling is so much different. You have some girls that are first and second year wrestlers, and you have some girls that are competing to be on a world and Olympic team, and we're all competing at the same tournaments. We're all competing on the same weekend. So, I would say the vastness of levels within, women's wrestling right now is probably the biggest difference. Whereas in men's, you have Division 1, 2, and 3, and everything's still a little bit separated, but women's wrestling is definitely getting there. So it's a very, very competitive environment right now.
When you came into the men's program a couple years ago, when you took over as head coach, did you find a lot of the challenges a couple years ago kind of happening as well when you took over the women's program? Were the challenges kind of the same? Were they different overall? Like, what was just your opinion being a new head coach, joining a new program with a small roster size, building it up to what it is today?
Well, it was very similar, really, because, both programs existed when I took them over. The only difference was the richness of tradition that men's wrestling had. I mean, 2 trophy teams, over 600 dual meet wins. It's one of the most prominent wrestling programs in history on the East Coast, if not all of Division III. So, that's one major difference. But other than that, it was pretty similar, right? Taking over a team with 6 to 8 guys on it, and then having to recruit like crazy to get that roster size up, and then continue working towards a more competitive roster, and being a prominent team in the conference and then the country. And then women's was the same thing. We started with anywhere from 3 to 6 girls that first year, and so the big goal was recruiting. We brought in 12 girls, and now we've got 5 committed for the following year. So I think it was easier just because I'd already been through it with the men's side on the process that it was going to take to really build up the women's side as well.
Speaking on that roster, this is probably the first year you've had all 10 weight classes on the women's side. What has that roster size meant to you, and how much further does that push you and the team?
Well, it means a lot, right? We did not want to compete in a ton of duels last year because we couldn't fill out a roster. So we were trying to go to a ton of tournaments and just get all of our girls meaningful mat time. Now that we have every weight class, you're more competitive in every duel. You're able to go to tournaments and be dangerous. You have more point scorers. So, instead of finishing 7th and 8th or 11th in tournaments, you're starting to finish in 3rd, 4th, winning tournaments. Like our girls won a tournament this year at York. We've won 11 dual matches this year, which is by far the most in history. So just being able to be dangerous as a team at meaningful tournaments, I think, is the most important aspect of it, because the more they see the success as an individual and as a team, it helps our growth. It helps us take the next step in the process, and it gives them something tangible, to shoot for each and every year.
Bridgette, same question for you. What is that, having that full roster, meant for you, and seeing that 11-5 record in duels?
It definitely helps to be more competitive in duels. I feel like when you're on a roster of 3 people, you're not going into the duel to win. You're kind of just going and focusing on yourself. And now I actually get to see that team aspect, competing for a team instead of competing for yourself out there. And it's meant a lot to have an army of girls behind you. I mean, one of my favorite moments, I guess, from this year with the team was when we went to a tournament and I was 2 points away from being teched, and at the break you just have this army of people just being like, you got it, you can do it, I believe in you. And like that's really special.
Yeah, and this Delaware Valley women's wrestling program was created in 2020, pretty much the same time you came here to Delaware Valley, and it took a few years and 2 coaching changes to really hit the ground running with this team. And 2 of you played such a pivotal rise in this women's wrestling program. Just like, what is the entire process? How has it been? Because Bridgette, it's been a struggle for you in the beginning because you went through coaching changes, not a full team, just practices not as organized as it is today. Just from your point of view and your experiences, how has it been for you? Just the struggle in the beginning of your career to what the program has built now, being a borderline top 25 team in the nation with 11 wins and 16 matches.
Yeah, I think the main message here is belief. Like, if you believe in something hard enough, it can happen. Part of the reason I didn't transfer into another program is because I believed that this one would give me what I wanted. And, sticking it out through the change in coaches, through COVID, through only having 2 people on the roster for like 4 years, I truly believe that I could get what I wanted if I worked hard enough here.
Yeah, absolutely. And pivoting away from Delaware Valley, we're just going to talk about the sport of women's wrestling in general. Over the past few years, the sport has grown tremendously. More and more high schools and universities all across the country have added the sport of women's wrestling. When I was a high school wrestler, and of course when you were a high school wrestler, Andrew, there was no women's wrestling programs in our high schools, and there was no women's wrestling programs either at the start of my collegiate career and when you were at Baldwin Wallace. And now almost every high school in the country, from the East Coast to the West Coast, is growing and adding women's wrestling into their programs. The growth has been really quick and really tremendous for the sport of women's wrestling. Just what are your opinions on the growth of the sport?
I mean, it's the fastest growing sport in the country right now. And the United States has one of the best women's wrestling programs in the world, as far as just when you're looking at international and world level. We produce some of the best Olympians and some of the best world teams out there. And I think with these next generations of young women's wrestlers, it's continuing to rapidly grow. Our most competitive women's wrestlers, I think, are 14, 15, and 16 years old right now. And just the exposure of wrestling that they get to see and the level of talent that's continuing to accumulate is pretty special. We have over 90 teams in the NCAA level. 60 plus of them are Division III. So it's really special even that the Division III format is leading the way and continuing the growth for NCAA women's wrestling. I think it's going to continue to grow rapidly. I think the wrestling is going to get even more competitive. Athletes like Bridgette are being revered because, they're paving the way for this younger generation of women's wrestling. It's going to continue to really pop up and, grow the sport immensely.
Yeah, Bridgette, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here. We're recording this on February 7th, which is also National Girls and Women's in Sports Day. What does this day kind of signify for you in the women's wrestling program?
I definitely think it's important to have a day, or at least a day, where women can kind of just reflect on how meaningful this sport has been in their life, but also the impact that they're making too. Because it's not just one person who's paving the way for everybody. It's everyone who's involved. So definitely just reflecting on their journey and how it's been for them. And, just so they gain some confidence that they're making an impact on others too.
Gotcha. All right, well, in 2 weeks, you're going to be competing at the regional tournament. And you're going to try to become a 3-time national qualifier. What's your mindset going into that tournament? And how do you want to end that with a shot, knock on wood, to be the program's first All-American?
Yeah, so my mindset basically is that I'm going to go into that tournament. I'm going to take it match by match, and I will be a 3-time qualifier. And then I'm just going to keep looking forward to nationals too, because I know I'm going to be there this year.
And then Andrew, what are the things you are seeing from Bridgette so far this season, and how could you see her prepare herself to take the next step? Because going into this region tournament, you pretty much have a good idea of what girls she will be wrestling and the competition she will face and what she will need to do in order to get to the next step at the national tournament and try and become the program's first ever All-American. Just what have you seen for her this season? And just talk about what you've seen from Bridgette throughout the season.
Yeah, I would say Bridgette's always been a workhorse, right? She's always been someone that comes in, puts in a ton of extra work, asks for individuals, does all the right things. And last year, the big difference, between last year and this year was probably her mindset. I mean, she has really engulfed herself in the process rather than the result. She's able to take losses as learning experiences, that does not get overly down on herself, and I think that's where you can really start to see the biggest jumps and start to see a lot more confidence build. She's wrestled 2 returning All-Americans now this year, where she's been right in the thick of things and put them on their backs, and didn't come out with a win, but you could see that last year that would have hurt her. This year she feels like, man, I'm right in there. I can go get this win on any given day, and she thinks like an All-American now. She thinks like somebody that deserves to be at that level, and I think that's the biggest separation from who she was and who she's going to be. So, that mindset is where she's taken some big-time leaps.
All right, so before we wrap things up, again, this podcast was a great way to talk about the sport of women's wrestling, kind of teach some of the people who aren't aware of the sport of how it's rapidly growing and how it's getting all across the country. But before we wrap up, we're going to give you some rapid-fire questions. We're going to ask you some random questions, and the first thing that comes to your head, you are going to answer with that. Let me know when you two are ready.
Cool.
Ready.
Okay, so number 1, what's your pregame meal?
My pregame meal. I love a bagel with Nutella.
I don't eat much.
You don't eat much, okay. Guilty pleasures show or movie, or you could just say, what's your favorite show or movie?
Right now I'm into The Office, so.
Bob's Burgers.
If you were in a talent show, what would you do and why?
And you can't say wrestling.
I would probably do a push-up.
What?
Just one?
I can
Just
do
one
a few.
push-up. I'd karaoke.
What song?
King Without a Crown by Modest Yahoo.
Favorite sport to watch outside of wrestling, and what is your favorite sports team, if so?
I don't watch sports.
Nice.
I'm sorry.
Didn't you work for the Phillies?
I mean, I could say the Phillies, yeah,
You
sure.
interned with the Phillies. You couldn't just say the Phillies?
They're going to be listening to this now. Hockey, Pittsburgh Penguins.
Good choice.
All right, so if you could have any dinner with any athlete, dead or alive, who would it be?
I'd probably have dinner with Helen Morales because she was the first woman to obtain a gold medal in the Olympics for the United States.
You could give a few if you have a few that you're trying to pick between.
Probably Kurt Angle, because he was coached in high school by my Uncle George.
If you could go to any sporting event, past or present, what would it be?
I would go back to 2008 when the Phillies were going to the World Series because my dad took me to one of their games and it was just a really special memory.
Not special enough. They're not your favorite team.
Okay, well, I don't watch them now.
I'd go to the Cubs game where they won the World Series in Cleveland.
And then last question, your favorite SpongeBob character?
Yes. I'm a big Gary person.
He doesn't talk.
I know, he's my favorite. He says it with his face.
I like Plankton because he's misunderstood.
All right, well, thank you guys so much for coming on, and good luck.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks for having us.
Of course, and fans, a reminder, Behind the Horns will be released monthly on Spotify and YouTube, so be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss any of the action.